Good evening, Danvers. Welcome to the Topics of the Town News, July 9th, 2020 edition. Today we have our co-host, Matthew Duggan, and we have to remind everyone that John Toomey, who is a third co-host to this program, is currently unavailable due to being cautious. And we have contacted John, and he's doing well. He's getting some, medical attention for his hearing, and he's going to be back when this whole thing is over. To remind everyone, we have a special guest today. We have Patricia Frazier, our town moderator, who was reelected again this year in a write-in campaign because she missed the signatures that she wasn't able to get due to the virus conditions. So, moving on, transparency and independent reporting is our motto. The Topics of the Town News reporting is by Danvers producers, and that's all three of us today, for Danvers residents. We always report the truth based on events in the town. Sometimes with our opinions included. And you know that, we have had opinions all along during the last, I think it's 10 years now. So, as an introduction, Pat is calling in. Oh, I see her, coming on.
I can't get in, so to the video.
Well, that's all right. Just stay on the audio. It's fine. We know what you look like and who you are. But as an introduction to our guest, Patricia Frazier, she is the current Danvers Town moderator, former select woman, and full disclosure, she served on the Board of Selectmen at the same time I was on, elected in 1995. She's a former town meeting member and various town committees. We had various town officials contribute to the contents of the show. This is the first opportunity that we have provided for exploring the work of the moderator and some intricate behind the scenes operations of town meeting. So we'll be talking about that later on. But in the meantime, just to get everybody settled, our recent productions that we've had in the last month or so, we've had the pastor from the Nazarene Church of Dayton Street, and he spoke regarding the church services in Danvers, drew the following quote. Our viewers sent me the following quote, which summarizes the sentiment of all our religious community. The quote is, the church must be reminded that it is not the master or the servant of the state, but rather the conscience of the state. It must be the guide and the critic of the state and never its tool. If the church does not recapture its prophetic zeal, it will become an irrelevant social club without moral or spiritual authority. And this is a quote by Martin Luther King back in the 70s, 60s. So this is a very important portion of our life that has been interrupted. And that's one of the items that we talked about on 2 shows ago. The other submittal that I received, which is very, very interesting, and it is another quote summarizes our current condition. Words of wisdom regarding a current situation. Midwest farmer is saying grace. A while back, and this is somebody writing this article, I read a story of a visiting pastor who attended a men's breakfast in the middle of rural farming area of the country. The group had asked an old farmer, decked out in his bibs, overalls, to say grace for the morning breakfast. The first thing he says, Lord, I hate buttermilk, the farmer began. The visiting pastor opened one eye to glance at the farmer and wondered where this was going. The farmer loudly proclaimed, Lord, I hate lard. Now the pastor was growing concerned. Without missing a beat, the farmer continued, and Lord, you know I don't much care for raw white flour. The pastor once again opened an eye to a glance around the room and saw that he wasn't the only one to feel uncomfortable. Then the farmer added, But Lord, when you mix them all together and bake them, I do love warm, fresh biscuits. So, Lord, when things come up that we don't like, when life gets hard, when we don't understand what you're saying to us, help us to join, just relax and wait until you are done mixing. It will probably be even better than biscuits. Amen. Within that prayer, there is a great wisdom for all when it comes to complicated situations like we are experiencing in the world today. Stay strong, my friends, because our Lord is mixing several things that we don't really care for, but something even better is going to come when He is done with us all. Amen. So, this is a complimentary type of quotes that I obtained, and they really refer to what's going on with our lives right now and our government and our personal lives as well. So, Matthew, I'm going to ask David to put up the King Unwilling Danvers Town Seal because our show today is in regard to the town meeting and to the presence of Pat Frazier, our moderator. The town seal represents our town meeting form of government and how this was conducted by our forefathers and cherished as a sacred duty to be governed by the people for the people. Town meeting is a cherished duty to support democracy. And elected town meeting members take the oath to abide by the constitutions of the United States and Massachusetts. We take this seriously. The Massachusetts and federal constitution is a restraint on the government. It tells the government what it can or cannot do. It does not tell the people what we can or can't do. So, as an introduction, Pat Frazier is is on the show with us, and Pat, you are on voice only. But what I was wondering, if you can just give us a little bit of a breakdown of why did you run for the office of town moderator, and what are your previous roles, and why did you decide on this position?
Thank you. So I ran for town moderator to replace, I believe it was David Mills, who was joining the bench of the Massachusetts Appeals Court. And so when I ran, I thought that based on my experience as a town meeting member for many years, a member of the Board of Selectmen, the zoning board, and a host of other committees, I thought I could bring sort of the knowledge of all of those roles they had previously held into the process and be able to, be successful in the role.
Well, that's, and you've been town moderator now for what, 12 years?
So I took over, I think it's closer to 18 years.
18 years, yeah.
I was the first woman ever to be elected and hold the role I gained that office the year we celebrated the 250th anniversary of the town. So it was it was a milestone for both me and the town.
There you go, and you've done a great job. Thank you.
Well, thank you.
The other item that I have on this question that I've raised, that what are your obligations and responsibilities? Because I know that Matthew and I are both town meeting members, and as you know, there's a lot of history behind my times, and Matthew has just run for selectman, so we're going to ask him the similar questions. What are your obligations and responsibilities right now?
So the town moderator is responsible for the conduct of the annual town meeting, and under the state statutes, the town, any town that has a town meeting form of government has to have at minimum one annual town meeting. And so that's the primary responsibility. I, during the day, by day, I'm an attorney, and I do a lot of public speaking in that job. When I am moderating the town meeting, I look at my role to be twofold. One is to give every point of view a reasonable opportunity to be heard. And the second is to manage the meeting so that, we're always progressing forward. We're moving the warrant forward. And so that's how I've always viewed my role. The secondary role is, I think, educating the public and both future and present town meeting members on the conduct of the meeting. Up until this year, I've held an annual town meeting school the Thursday before the town meeting. And in that, I really try to encourage folks, because not everybody is a natural public speaker, and not everyone has the opportunity to do that on a daily basis. And so I also view my role as sort of coach, to be able to get folks to feel comfortable getting up in front of a crowd. And I always remind people, these are your neighbors. So whenever we're speaking before town meeting, we're speaking to our friends and neighbors, and hopeful that people feel comfortable in getting up and asking a question or making a comment.
Well, that's the one thing that has struck me this year, and you and I have had long discussions, but what's the difference this year versus the past? Because I know you kept us in line as town meeting members, and you snap the whip and you get us all acting properly. But this year, it's totally different. This year, the selectmen and the other boards have decided to go on conference calls instead of being exposed to the public. And at this year's town meeting, you made it happen that it was in person instead of on television.
Well, I thought that was important. As far as the Board of Selectmen, I wasn't privy to their discussions about how they chose to conduct their meetings. I think all you need to do is look at the demographics of the members of the Board of Selectmen, particularly before our most recent election. And by that definition, they're in that demographic where they have an enhanced risk of complications of COVID. But I'm sure that however they came to the determination to conduct their meeting, it had to have been in compliance with whatever the open meeting law and regulations were issued by the Secretary of State, who monitors that. So that I feel confident. As far as the town meeting was concerned, the state legislature, and I think too, as far as the Board of Selectmen and the committees, I think we got to harken back to where we were as a state and a community, and the status of the COVID pandemic at the end of March and April, when the bulk of our conversation about the town budget and the formulation of the warrant occurs, which is, I think, different than it is today. You know, as far as the town meeting is concerned, the state legislature did give broad discretion in, rescheduling town meetings. Obviously, we rescheduled the town election, and initially, the Board of Selectmen ultimately decides the date and the warrant. They had initially scheduled, and I'm giving you a sort of behind-the-scenes look here. They initially had scheduled town meeting to occur on June 15th, and I had suggested, why don't we push it back a week? That's going to give us another week of hopefully positive news about COVID, et cetera. So we ended up, they ended up scheduling it for the 22nd, which I think gave us, an additional week of status, and then also provided enough time so that if there were some issues, they could be addressed before the end of the fiscal year on June 30th. The moderators were given broad discretion about where to conduct town meetings and in what fashion. And I think you saw some of that on some news programs where some towns elected to do it out on their football fields. And that actually was something that we had looked at. Again, I'm giving you the behind the scenes look here. We had considered that. I just felt I didn't want to take the chance that we would have either inclement weather or it would be too hot and the audio. I have to say, Joe Collins and I worked very, very hard. We looked at all the spaces that might be available and might be big enough. And obviously the auditorium wouldn't have worked because you have people walking, you have people that, you might have been able to socially distance the seat, but you wouldn't have been able to socially distance getting to the microphone. So ultimately we landed on the field house, and we met over two sessions with DPW and school personnel, and sort of marked out where, measured so that every chair had a 6 foot in every direction, 6 feet of space, and the aisleways met fire code, went over there twice. And I have to say, I have nothing but the highest praise for the folks who helped us set up, because I changed some things around, and I think we gave people an opportunity to come into the meeting, and even though we were in an enclosed space for a period of time, to be safe. So, and that's how it came to be this year.
Well, then it was very refreshing to see that the town meeting was held in person. And
Right.
One thing I want to congratulate you on insisting on it, because that's the way it should be happening. I mean, it has to have public input, whether it's legislators like the town meeting members or the general public, because these meetings are currently held in seclusion and isolation, and people do not have access to open meeting laws.
Right. Well, and so, I think you started the meeting off with a picture of our town seal, which is the town, that's the, I guess the predominant feature of the town seal is the town meeting. And I have to tell you, it was not going to happen on my watch that we didn't have a town meeting. But I'm just so grateful to the folks who, helped us set up, and then also grateful to the town meeting. I'm sorry, I got the phone ringing there in the background. Grateful to the folks who came. And so, I was initially a little worried about whether or not we were going to meet a quorum, and that we far surpassed the quorum. We had, and I'm not a math major, but we had 78.1% of town meeting members attend, which given the time we're in, I think was awesome.
It was very successful in the number of people that showed up because they have the obligation and responsibility for attending these meetings because we as legislators for the town, Matthew is a legislator, you're an elected town meeting member. And the thing is that that's an obligation that we assumed when we ran for that office.
Right. I think that there are people that have, serious underlying conditions that, due to age and underlying conditions that physically either wasn't possible or not advisable for them to attend. So I just think that, those folks, I just could not make it work that we could, I just couldn't make it work that we had a sort of a remote ability for those members to attend. I just couldn't make it work with what we were dealing with, in the room. The other thing I think is important to say, we're a representative town meeting. So unlike other towns that had to go to like a football field because they had no idea how many people were going to show up, I was dealing with a fixed number of people because it's a representative town meeting. So I sort of, I was planning on what would be the maximum number of people who would show up and was able to adequately plan for that as far as spacing folks out.
Well, great. I really was impressed and I appreciate what you have done, but you have made that decision. And the other board meetings, which people have been complaining about, have not happened as planned because there is no resident or taxpayer participation. So now I just want to mention one thing that on your outline here is that we have a very clear and definitive town meeting handbook, which I think you were a participant in organizing that back in, 97, 98, or I don't remember now, but.
Well, actually, that was a joint project by Kathy Wojtowicz, who is now retired, Joe Collins, and myself in celebration of the 250th anniversary of the town. So that was last done in like 2000, I think.
Well,
or 2002, whatever year that was. I can't recall.
Yeah, you have used that for me to remind me of my limitations of what I can say and what I can't say. So now that we know what the functions and responsibilities of the town moderator are, I just want to turn this into Matthew Duggan. He has been a candidate for selectman. He has visited and sat in on many meetings that are held for the public, and he's a town meeting member as well. So Matthew, what do you think of the, why did you run for the office of selectman?
Well, thank you for the opportunity to explain my my campaign. But no, seriously, I ran for selectman because I've been a town meeting member for 14 years and initially just in precinct 1, and over the years it just kind of morphed into more of a town-wide kind of representation. People in other precincts would call me and ask me to speak on their behalf at some of these public hearings. And so just over time, I just gained a greater perspective of the town-wide governance. So when there was an opening, I threw my hat in the ring. I didn't know who else was going to run. I thought I had the strong credentials. I was a strong candidate, I thought, and so gave the voters another choice. I'm glad I ran.
Well, I'm glad. Thank you. The reason I'm asking you the question is because a lot of times roles like for selectmen or campaigns for selectmen are generated through the town meeting or through the finance committee or some other committee that drives the interest into it. And what were your previous roles? Any other? Because that's what it builds.
Yeah, so I've been in Danvers since 2000. One of my first forays into kind of the community effort was I was a member of the Danvers Bipeds. That was the group that was promoting the concept of a rail trail. And I became a VP after a short while of being a member of that group. And our objective was to get the selectmen to sign a lease with the MBTA, so we could actually go out onto the right of way. Without the lease, we were trespassing if you went on the right of way. So that was the first step in getting the rail trail off the ground. And the selectmen at the time weren't having any of it. They weren't willing to even discuss it. They thought it was we had to fund the middle school and the high school, and we didn't have the money to build out the rail trail. And we were promoting the idea that it was going to be a volunteer effort. So after going through that back and forth over for a few years, in 2006, I ran for town meeting. I created a citizens petition for support of the concept of the trail, and I also campaigned for Gardner Trask and Bill Clark. They were both kind of more favorable for that trail, and that's how I kind of got involved with the political spectrum here in town.
Well, good. Well, see, things build up as moderator, as selectman, and as town meeting member. There's a reason for getting up and in front of your agenda for what you want for this town. It's all to make the town better and make it run better.
Certainly, yep.
And then my next question here was, how did you end up as town meeting member? You already told us that. What do you see as your responsibilities and obligations now? Because this whole system has changed in the last 6 months. And what do you see as the town meeting member representative now, because you've been reelected to town meeting as well? What do you see as your responsibilities?
Well, I'm still I'm still doing the same thing. We haven't been having these public meetings. I get phone calls and emails from people in here in Precinct 1. They have concerns. Maybe it's somebody's dumping trash. There's a building down the street that's been under construction for, it seems like, years. So I'm still fully engaged. I'm not, even though I lost the campaign for selectman, I'm still fully engaged, and right now my effort is with these remote meetings. And so Pat talked about the town meeting and the way that was conducted with the distancing, wiping of the microphones. That was really well thought out and executed. So the following week, on the Monday, the ZBA had their first public meeting. Actually, they hadn't had any meetings at all since the end of February. So here it is 4 months later, the ZBA finally has a meeting at the high school auditorium. That was very much like the town meeting. Rows were taped off. You had to only circulate in one direction, only one person at a time near the mic. So again, well executed. The following night at the selectmen's meeting at the middle school, things just kind of fell apart. People congregating at the microphone, people sitting too close together. So, this is what happens when you let your guard down. You really, things fall apart.
The one thing that I would comment on in regard to these remote meetings and being on television only, there's very little participation from the general public, and the audio is so muffled with these masks that they're wearing. And I think well, my feeling, I hate the dictates from the governor and whatever law he's using to promote this, but you can't understand some of the comments or some of the input that has been asked for. And the selectmen are sitting there and they're not, making sure
Yeah.
that everybody hears it.
So can I just speak to that for a couple minutes? Because that's kind of what my topic is for today's show. So this state of emergency that the governor declared back on March 10th, that's 4 months ago tomorrow that we've been under that. And so there's these different phases that we're in now where things are reopening, gyms, barbershops, etc. But part of that state of emergency was the suspension of certain provisions in the open meeting law. And that's what's allowing these remote meetings. So I mentioned a few minutes ago about the ZBA and the selectmen have made an effort to actually open it up so people can attend these meetings, albeit in a safe way. But the planning board and the conservation commission have refused to even think about doing that. And from what my perspective and from what I'm seeing, we could go for months, even into next year, with these restrictions on open meeting. And I think it's a violation of the open meeting law, even with the governor's constraints. He specifically said that any party that's entitled to attend a public hearing should be able to join the meetings and have real-time access. That's not sending email messages to an intermediary. That doesn't fulfill this requirement. So when we say real-time, the public should be allowed to join these WebEx meetings. And when I mentioned this to the selectmen, 2 meetings in a row, it was dismissed as being, it wasn't important. That the applicant and the board can have real-time discussions about public hearings, and I use that term lightly in this context. But these are contentious issues. This 28 Harbor Street that the planning board is considering special permits and variances. There's quite a few town meeting members that are very upset that the board is not willing to allow public input in real time. So I could talk about this for another hour, but
well, we have an opportunity later on for specifics that you can get into. But right now, Pat Frazier, this is in regards to the news story number 1, which is the town meeting, and I'd like to go back to that. Why were you able to conduct the town meeting in person and all other committees were done by Zoom or by direction of the declared emergency by the governor? And this is going back to Matthew's question.
Yeah.
And where were the elected selectmen at this time? No leadership was available except from you.
Well, thank you. But, again, I'm not privy to why the Board of Selectmen conducted their meetings the way they did. As far as being able to, there was specific provisions by the legislature, and I also believe the governor's executive orders that excluded governmental entities such as town meeting. So I didn't have to obtain any permission or anything like that. It was, the town meeting is scheduled on a date and time selected by the Board of Selectmen, and the warrant is selected by the Board of Selectmen, and
Right.
the moderator's role is to make sure that that meeting goes forward and is conducted. And again, I felt that strongly that the meeting be held in person, indoors if possible. And I note that the governor, I think the legislature has also allowed now to allow further flexibility, towns to conduct town meetings in places other than their own community. So for an example, let's say Middleton didn't have a place to hold the town meeting, they can actually notice the meeting for the town of Danvers and have their folks come over and use our facility to conduct a meeting. So I think, I think there was a degree of flexibility that allowed both I think the nature and the number of people that were able to attend town meetings across the state. And that was something I do have to say, the Massachusetts Moderators Association was very on top of this issue early on, conducted a number of WebEx meetings where people exchanged ideas about what they were doing, et cetera. So I thought that was helpful. And again, we're in a situation where we have a representative town meeting. So unlike another town that could, depending on the issue, have 300 people show up, but I knew that we weren't going to have more than 150 people in that room, and we could, plan for that contingency.
No, I think the town meeting after the arrangements that have been made, I think went off very well. The only thing that I have a comment on and my own concerns is at the town meeting itself, the audio system, that's a different issue. Audio system was not that great because I couldn't hear what the selectmen were mumbling over there. And the thing is that we had not had a very in-depth review of the budget and the presentations, and either by Finance Committee or the Board of Selectmen, because the Board of Selectmen basically at their remote meetings were basically pounding their chest and making sure that everybody knew that they were involved in the budget, but the budget didn't change. It didn't address anything. The significant issues that I brought up to myself. I was watching one of the selectmen's meeting, and they had a interim budget that they approved at a selectmen's board meeting with a vote for $20 million plus or minus. There's some pennies in there that they were going to allow to pass even if we didn't have a town meeting. And I'm glad that you had the town meeting, because that's the legislative authority that they need to spend our tax dollars.
Well,
the thing is that they were
again, this is a behind the scenes comment. The Massachusetts Municipal Association was floating an idea that the legislature give the Board of Selectmen across the state, not just Danvers, floated an idea that town meetings not take place, and that the simple passage of the budget by the Board of Selectmen would go into effect by July 1st. And that was something I got wind of, and I strongly opposed, frankly. So I'm not sure what the background of the Board of Selectmen deciding to do that. That might have been a contingency if the town meeting did not go forward. But when all is said and done, the town meeting did go forward. So whatever interim budget they may or may not have passed, it became irrelevant once we had the town meeting.
Well, that's why at the town meeting there wasn't even a mention of it. But my concern with that was that the 1/12 budget for this town is roughly $10 million. However, the Board of Selectmen sat there and voted a $20 million 1/12 budget. What sense does that make? But that's not a comment that we need to talk about. But I thought this was something important that was brought up to me when I watched this show, the Selectmen's show. And the thing is that there was no question why went up to $20 million. They requested $20 million, and 1/12 is only 10. So neither here nor there. But what I wrote on here, and I just want to express this a little bit. Selectmen did a lot of pounding of their chest during the 2021 budget review hearing. Not one selectman asked for a reduction to the tax burden of the 25,000 residents in our town. There was no comment even made that we should be, reducing our tax collections because everybody's hurting. It's not just the state, it's not just the town, it's every resident in this town. Budget reviews were conducted. The meeting was attended by all who had interest in benefiting from the town treasury. No residents, taxpayers were even allowed to input because they were done by email. And by the time they went to the next item, like Matthew said earlier, they bypassed it and ignored it totally. I even sent one in, and I know that mine wasn't read. And no,
well, Mark, I think you need to have a follow-up show with Dan Bennett then.
I would love to have a show with
I
any
don't
one
have
of
any
them.
comment on how they conducted their budget review hearing. That's beyond the scope of my responsibility as moderator.
Well, no, that's just a my own personal comment here, and like I said earlier, we have our opinion here as well. There was no reduction in anything that may have reduced the tax burden on our seniors and young families who may have to leave this town because of the high taxes that we have. And that's been my issue since 1995. You know that. One of the things that I'm very concerned about is we passed this budget at town meeting. And Matthew, you voted in there as well. In a note to selectmen, Danvers Town Manager Steve Bartha signaled more severe cuts may be needed once the town gets a clearer picture of the impact of the coronavirus crisis, which local and state funding. Dave Copeland wrote that in his article. The cuts are already coming. The residents must also adjust their budgets. The inflated 112 proposal, which I spoke about, is irrelevant. I mean, we have passed this budget. The thing is that I believe, and I think you do too, Pat, and Matthew, is that this is going to have to be revisited and is revisited soon because nothing's changing. Pat?
Okay, I didn't know if Matt wanted to take that question. No, I agree. I mean, this is a very, very uncertain time. Obviously, state, we are dependent, as every community is, on state aid. That's up in the air. And you look at the effect that COVID has had, and I think will continue to have over a period of time of, the impact on those things such as meals and hotel taxes. That is revenue for the town. That I think it's difficult. I think as we sort of progress through these different phases, we'll probably get a better feel of whether or not how much of that revenue that we are not currently experiencing can be recouped. But I just think that it is a very uncertain time, and I would not be surprised at all if we're not back to a special town meeting sometime in the fall or perhaps early 2021 to maybe adjust some budget figures. I mean, that's my own. I don't have any, knowledge on that, but that is my supposition.
Well, I've just as a comment on my part, and Matthew, I don't know if you agree with this or not, but I believe that what we did at town meeting, we basically passed the budget that the town manager and the board of selectmen wanted, but we had no idea of how those funds are going to be paid for, except for the fact that they have considered the reduction in the state revenue and the meals tax, and they have taken certain reductions, because the budget went down by, a significant amount of money, but they have not considered the residents. Now, many towns or many residents in some of the surrounding towns are calling for not paying their real estate taxes because they don't feel they're getting the services that are supposed to be paid for through real estate tax. And one of them is the schools. The schools are not functioning properly right now. Our 50% or more than 50% of our budget is for the schools. And like I've said in the past, the only agencies and the government agencies and related to the municipal agencies that are not being affected at all because they rely on the tax revenue that we generate for our town. 80 some $6 million is coming from tax revenue for this budget, and none of it is being considered as being cut because people are in government are saying they will pay whether they like it or not. So that's my opinion. So Matthew, you got anything on that?
On the budget, well, I think we're living in a state of denial. So rather than being proactive and trying to make cuts ahead of time, we're just going to have to be reactive down the road when the state discovers that there's going to be significant shortfalls from the federal government. For example, for the MBTA, I think there's a prediction that there'll be significant cutbacks for transportation funding. And we know that in Eastern Mass, we can't live without the MBTA. I saw that Essex Tech has already had issues with their budget. They were doing a 1/12 budget for this month. And I think they did a kind of a token reduction of $1 million, but they've also furloughed some of their staff. And it may be because it's the summertime, they can do that without a significant impact to the student body. But they also have been doing remote learning. So we'll see what happens in the fall when schools have to gear up either part-time in classroom or continue with this, remote learning, which has an impact on the parents who, how can they go back to work if they have to continue to be teaching their children during the day? So I think the selectmen and the town manager just played it safe and based their forecast on what they saw in 2008 with the Great Recession. And for example, I think the cherry sheet section or Chapter 70 monies for 12 years ago, they didn't see a dramatic decrease. So I think they're basing this new budget on that reality that happened back then.
Well, they reduced some receipts that they expected from the state, and that's the only place I saw any changes. But the issue that I have is more of why are we not considering the whole package? Because we as town meeting members basically sent a open checkbook for the town hall to spend their money. And they are not grounded on actual returns or expected returns. It's all budget. It's all estimates. And the thing is that we sent an open checkbook to the town hall and say, go ahead and spend up to this limit, because they will not spend over that limit, but they will not spend under that limit either. So that's my opinion, and take it for what it is.
And I think it's because, the taxpayers aren't willing to pay more, and they're not willing to accept less in terms of services. So at some point, there's going to be a collision between those two realities, right? Either we have to charge more to make up for the shortfalls, or if we don't decide to go that route, then we have to reduce the services, and that means laying off employees. So in either event, we can't win either way, but we do have to address it at some point.
Well, Patricia, what do you think?
Well, I'm moderator, so I don't get it.
You don't get to think?
I don't get to
be
voice
impartial.
the moderator.
He's neutral party.
I appreciate the comments, Matthew, because I think, this is an open checkbook, and I've said that before. So now what we like to do is we like to move to a section that Matthew wanted to include in here, and we're very concerned about the public access for the committees that are held. Basically, the only committee that we're interested in is Zoning Board of Appeals, which is appointed by the Board of Selectmen. And all the other ones, the Planning Board, the Municipal Light Board, Water and Sewer Board, and the Board of Selectmen, they're doing their meetings in, and I hate to say this, in their bunkers. And very little access to the public. So what would your suggestion be, Matthew?
Well, I can give you an example. So, was it last week? Actually, the week before. So I think the 24th and the 23rd of June. So I was invited to two meetings. I attended the Preservation Commission meeting. I was invited to that WebEx meeting. And then the following day, on Wednesday, the Traffic Advisory Committee, I was also invited to that with a WebEx invitation. So, I don't know why the public can't be invited. Just this morning at work, I was on a Skype call with, or actually it was Microsoft Teams, with more than 90 people, right. And in that case, anyone can speak if they want, but you can tighten it up so you have a moderator who unmutes people and allows them to speak, but there's a tighter control over the discussion, so you just don't have people making vile comments or whatever. So I think they've just taken the easy way out. The public, we're just passive observers. You showed earlier the town seal where it said the king is unwilling. Well, the selectmen are the leaders and they don't want to force the issue. So we should change the town seal to the selectmen are unwilling. It's very frustrating that for people that attend public meetings or public hearings on a regular basis to be shut out of the process. It's just, it's offensive to me that an applicant can just have unfettered access to the board, and the public is just shut out completely.
Right. Well, Pat, you being an attorney and our moderator, I've been pounding the table that all of these limitations and restrictions are guidance by the governor. And our town management team has basically issued an emergency notice similar to what the governor had. Is any of that legal? I don't think so, but they seem to think so. And it's being held in abeyance basically in the court system because people have appealed it. And one of the things is the notifications about public meetings is supposed to be posted in a very visible position. They haven't made any attempt to that. So the question is, how legitimate or legal is all of this that we're going through? Because we have succumbed to the threats of life or death. And what right has the governor to do this? Pat?
Well, I have to be honest with you, Mark. I may have a disagreement of opinion there where, I don't have an issue with the governor issuing executive orders for the public safety. I don't. I think, participation in meetings that are, such as the planning board that Matt described, that is troubling to me, that the applicant gets to appear, and then there's the questions are then not, immediately brought, the conversation is immediately brought to the room. So, I'm, in that regard, I really, and I'm hopeful now that Town Hall will be opening up to the public shortly, that, boards and committees will make every effort to, have, maintain safe social distancing, maintain a safe room, and allow for real-time public participation. I agree with Matt, but as far as I have to laugh. The rules I had for town meeting, which I have to say everybody respected, was the wearing of the mask, wiping down of the microphone, etc. I could have had 100 of you saying, "I'm not doing that," and then what do I do? But I just think that we all live in a community where we have to protect ourselves and protect others, and we protect our families. So I don't have an issue with that, and I'm frankly hopeful that as time has progressed, we're now in a different phase where the gyms were open this week. That I'm hopeful, and I would think that the boards and committees would now find a way to accommodate citizens attending real time.
Well, thank you. I think that's very appropriate. And as you and I talked before the town meeting, I was going to be one of the ones that was going to be sent to the back of the room because I didn't. And I still contend that, these masks are a symbol of our submission to our government. And that's from historical information that I grew up in. And the story from the past. And the thing is that we need to take our liberties more seriously. And the thing is that maybe someone needs to stand up and say, "Hey, Governor, this is enough. Let's stop this, because this is not doing us any good." We are claiming that this is doing such a great thing, but maybe it is, maybe it isn't, but I don't like it. So, in closing comments, I would like to ask Pat, if you could please say anything if you like. But I want to thank you for participating with us, because Matthew and I are lonesome out here, all alone in our bunkers.
Well, I want to thank you for inviting me. It's been actually, I'm looking at the time, I can't believe an hour has gone by. And so I thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk a little bit about the town meeting and how I view my role. And thank you.
Well, we want to thank you. And Matthew, any final comments?
No, I kind of disagree with you about the masks. I think I mentioned a couple of months ago in one of these shows about we won't know if we're actually overreacting. But now in hindsight, I think that we didn't overreact. That we see that Massachusetts is one of the few states that seem to have gotten it right. We weren't in a rush to open things up. So from that perspective, I think the governor was on the right track, similar to Governor Cuomo in New York. So I'm kind of proud of our state leadership. There's definitely a void from the federal level. And I feel bad for the people down south that are really being impacted by this. So I think we should just kind of keep doing what we're doing, but maybe fine tune it a bit to make sure that we're not losing any of our civil liberties.
David, could you please show our last slide? And this is my famous vacancy at Town Hall, because we have all been locked out of the Town Hall for various reasons, and we can have our own reasons, but there it is. Vacancy continues. So, Pat, thank you very much for participating, and Matthew, good night.
All right. Good night, Danvers. Thank you, Pat.
Thank you.